case?
Let's go back to when it all started, to a crime scene that shocked the country.
911 location of your emergency.
Hi, something is happening. Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
Inside that home, 4 University of Idaho students, Ethan Chapin, Zana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez, were brutally stabbed to death on November 13th, 2022.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night.
4 days later, an autopsy showed the students were sleeping when they were attacked. Less than a month later, police said a white Hyundai Elantra had been seen near the scene of the crimes, and police would later find out that white Hyundai Elantra had been registered to a PhD student in criminology. It wasn't long before that student became a person of interest and then a suspect.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohlberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania.
After a tight-lipped investigation, an arrest, Brian Kohlberger apprehended some 2,500 miles away in Pennsylvania. Police saying Kohlberger's dad flew to Washington state to meet his son and made the cross-country road trip back to Pennsylvania with him in the days after the killings in a white Hyundai Elantra like the one they were looking for. During the cross-country road trip, Indiana police pulling them over twice in a matter of minutes for tailgating. Then came the arrest. Kohlberger charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and
A jury
burglary.
files back into the courtroom. Less than 2 hours of deliberation. The number is read aloud. $10 million. Not against a killer. Not against an accomplice. But against a woman who wasn't even at the crime scene. How did a brutal quadruple homicide in a quiet college town turn into one of the most shocking defamation verdicts tied to a murder case in recent memory? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. 4 students stabbed in their sleep. A criminology PhD arrested weeks later. A guilty plea that avoided the death penalty. And years after the murders, a professor awarded $10 million over false accusations tied to the case. This is not just a murder story. It's a story about investigation, silence, digital speculation, and consequences. Welcome to Crime Case Examiner. In today's case, the full story behind the Idaho murders, the arrest of a criminology PhD, and the $10 million fallout no one saw coming. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe and join our growing community of viewers who care about facts over frenzy. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I always read them. Now, let's get into it. The number would come years later. $10 million. But before the verdict, before the guilty plea, before the arrest in Pennsylvania, there was a house on King Road in Moscow, Idaho. And inside that house, in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, 4 young lives ended in violence. It was a cold Sunday morning in a small college town. Moscow is the kind of place where students walk home after midnight without much fear, where neighbors recognize each other's cars, where sirens are rare enough to draw attention. The off-campus residence on King Road was known as a lively student home. Friends coming and going, lights on late, laughter drifting into the quiet Idaho night. Inside were 6 roommates. By the time the sun rose, 4 of them would be dead. Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, Kaylee Goncalves. Sometime between approximately 4 o'clock and 4:25 a.m., an intruder entered the 3-story home. There were no clear signs of forced entry reported publicly. No shattered windows, no kicked-in doors. The house had multiple sliding and standard entry points, typical for a student rental, and investigators would later focus on one particular sliding door believed to have been accessible. The attack was swift and brutal. Each of the 4 victims suffered multiple stab wounds. A large fixed-blade knife was believed to have been used. The level of violence described by authorities was severe. The crime scene itself would later be characterized as complex. Multiple rooms, multiple victims, Blood evidence spread across different areas of the home. 2 other roommates were inside that night. They survived. Though one of them later told investigators she heard unusual noises. What she initially thought were sounds of roommates moving around. At one point, she opened her door and saw a masked male figure dressed in black clothing walking past her toward the rear sliding door. She froze. The figure left. It was not until late the next morning, just before noon, that a 911 call was placed. The call came from one of the surviving roommates' phones, reporting an unconscious person. By the time officers arrived, the scene was already beyond rescue. 4 students were gone, and at first, there was no suspect. News spread rapidly. A quadruple homicide in a quiet college town shattered the sense of safety almost overnight. Parents called their children. Students left campus early for Thanksgiving break. Gun stores reportedly saw increased sales. Social media filled with speculation. Who could do something like this? In the early phase of the investigation, authorities released very little. They confirmed the victims had been stabbed. They assured the public there was no ongoing threat. Yet, they did not name a suspect. Weeks passed. Behind the scenes, investigators were working an enormous crime scene. The house was processed inch by inch. Blood patterns, footprints, digital devices, surveillance footage. Everything was catalogued. The FBI joined local and state authorities. Behavioral analysts assisted. Thousands of tips poured in. Then, a detail emerged. Near one of the victims, investigators recovered a tan leather knife sheath. It bore the insignia of a military-style blade manufacturer. On the snap of that sheath was a small but powerful piece of evidence. A single-source male DNA profile. That sheath would become central to the case. Around the same time, investigators began asking the public for information about a white Hyundai Elantra seen in the area during the early morning hours of the murders. Surveillance cameras from nearby homes and businesses had captured a white sedan making multiple passes near King Road between approximately 3:29 and 4:20 a.m. The vehicle's movements appeared deliberate. Traffic camera mapping helped reconstruct its path through Moscow. The FBI assisted in narrowing down possible registrations across multiple states. Law enforcement asked for help locating the car, stating that its occupant or occupants might have critical information. And technology became a silent witness. Cell phone tower data was analyzed to identify devices that had been in the vicinity of the King Road residence during the relevant time frame. One particular phone number drew attention. According to later court documents, that phone had been near the victim's home on multiple occasions prior to the murders, often late at night or early in the morning. On the night of the killings, the device appeared to stop reporting data for a window of time. It went dark. She then reconnected hours later. The DNA from the knife sheath did not match anyone in the national CODIS database. There was no immediate hit. So investigators widened the net. They turned to investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that compares unknown DNA profiles to publicly available genealogical databases to identify potential relatives. It is the same method that helped identify the Golden State Killer years earlier. The genetic trail pointed toward a family line in Pennsylvania. But surveillance teams began watching a home in Albrightsville. Inside that home for the holidays was a 28-year-old doctoral student named Brian Koberger. He was pursuing a PhD in criminology at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, just across the state line from Moscow. He had previously earned degrees in psychology and criminal justice. He had studied criminal behavior. He had even conducted surveys asking former offenders about their emotions during the commission of crimes. According to investigators, Koberger owned a white Hyundai Elantra. In late December 2022, law enforcement conducted a covert trash pull from the Pennsylvania residence where he was staying with his parents. DNA recovered from discarded items was sent for testing. The results indicated that the male DNA on the knife sheath was statistically linked to Kohberger's biological father. The probability of it belonging to someone else was astronomically small. In the early hours of December 30th, 2022, our tactical teams moved in. Brian Kohberger was arrested without incident at his parents' home. A man studying criminal minds, now accused of committing one of the most shocking crimes in modern college history. He was extradited to Idaho and formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The affidavit detailing the probable cause was released shortly after, and the public devoured every line. Pre-trial proceedings quickly became a legal battleground. Given the scale of media coverage, defense attorneys sought a change of venue, arguing that extensive publicity could prejudice potential jurors. The prosecution pursued the death penalty, triggering months of litigation over aggravating factors and procedural requirements. Defense motions challenged elements of the evidence, including the use of investigative genetic genealogy. There were motions to suppress certain statements and data. And there were disputes over discovery deadlines and expert testimony. A sweeping gag order was imposed early in the case to limit public commentary from attorneys, law enforcement, and witnesses. The order itself became a subject of legal debate, with media organizations arguing for greater transparency. Delays followed. The sheer volume of digital evidence, phone data, surveillance video, forensic reports, required time to analyze. The potential for capital punishment meant heightened procedural scrutiny. Court calendars shifted. Hearings were postponed. Outside the courtroom, the case never left the headlines. Was the media coverage already shaping the outcome? As more documents became public, the evidence appeared increasingly technical and data-driven. The DNA match from the knife sheath remained central. On cell phone records allegedly showed Kohberger's device traveling from Pullman to Moscow in the early morning hours of November 13th, then returning. Surveillance footage placed a white Hyundai Elantra, consistent with his vehicle, near the crime scene. Images of his apartment were released, showing sparse furnishings and items seized for analysis. Investigators also recovered academic writings and materials related to criminal behavior. But no publicly confirmed motive emerged. Even after arrest, the question remained, why? There was no clear documented relationship between Kohberger and the victims presented in open court. No manifesto, no confession explaining intent. The motive, at least publicly, remained a void. Then, in 2025, the trajectory of the case changed. Rather than proceed to a full capital trial, Brian Kohberger entered a guilty plea. He pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. In exchange, the prosecutors removed the death penalty from consideration. The agreement ensured that he would spend the rest of his life in prison. At sentencing, the court imposed 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with additional time for burglary. For some family members, the plea brought a measure of closure. A trial would have meant reliving the details publicly for weeks, perhaps months. For others, the absence of a full trial left lingering questions unanswered. In court, there was no detailed explanation of motive delivered to the public. No extended narrative from the defendant, just the formal acknowledgement of guilt. 4 young lives ended. 1 man condemned to die behind bars. And still, in the silence that followed, one question continued to echo. Why? The guilty plea closed the criminal case, but it did not close the story. Because while the legal system was grinding forward in courtrooms and filings, another trial had been unfolding in real time, on phones, on live streams, in comment sections. And this time, the target was not the accused killer. It was a professor. Her name was Ashley Gillard, a Texas-based TikTok creator who described herself as a tarot reader and spiritual influencer. In the chaotic weeks after the murders, when fear was high and official information was limited, Gillard began posting videos about the case. At first, like many online commentators, she offered speculation, but her content quickly escalated beyond commentary. She claimed that her tarot readings revealed who was responsible. And according to her, it wasn't just Brian Kohberger. She repeatedly accused a University of Idaho professor named Rebecca Scofield of orchestrating or participating in the murders. The allegations were not vague. Gillard claimed that Scofield had a romantic relationship with one of the victims. She alleged jealousy. She suggested planning. She framed the accusations as spiritual revelations rather than investigative conclusions. But she presented them as truth. Over time, the number of videos grew. Dozens. Then more than 100. Each one reinforcing the same narrative. There was no police suspicion directed at Scofield. No charges. No public statement from law enforcement linking her to the crime. In fact, records indicated that Scofield had been out of state at the time of the murders. But online, the distinction between suspicion and storytelling can blur. Millions watched, and the accusations spread. For Rebecca Scofield, the impact was immediate and personal. She was a history professor, a career academic. Suddenly, her name was being circulated in connection with one of the most notorious murder cases in recent memory. Her inbox filled. Her professional reputation came under strain. Colleagues and students were forced to confront a wave of rumors that had no grounding in fact. And in a case already marked by violence and grief, another kind of damage was unfolding. Eventually, Scofield took the matter to court. She filed a civil lawsuit against Ashley Gillard, alleging defamation. The complaint argued that Gillard had knowingly or recklessly spread false statements accusing her of serious crimes, statements that harmed her reputation, career, and emotional well-being. And the legal question was straightforward but powerful. When does online speculation become unlawful defamation? As the case progressed, a federal judge reviewed the content of the videos. The court examined whether the statements were presented as factual claims and whether they were false. The judge ruled that Gillard's statements were defamatory as a matter of law. That meant the upcoming jury trial would not decide whether the claims were false. That issue had already been determined. And instead, the jury would decide damages. By March 2026, the civil case reached a courtroom in Boise. Jurors heard testimony about the scope of the accusations. They learned that more than 100 videos had been posted. They were told about the reach, views, shares, engagement. They heard about the personal toll on Scofield, anxiety, reputational harm, fear. They also heard Gillard's defense, that her statements were rooted in spiritual belief, that she did not intend harm, that she believed what she was saying. Then the jury left to deliberate. Less than 2 hours later, they returned. $10 million. Approximately $6.5 million tied directly to the false murder accusations. Roughly $3.5 million connected to the fabricated claims of a romantic relationship. The majority of the award was punitive damages, not merely to compensate Scofield, but to punish the conduct and deter similar actions in the future. And it was one of the most striking defamation awards linked to online crime commentary in recent years. Ashley Gillard publicly criticized the verdict. She described it as unjust. She suggested she would pursue an appeal. But the message from the courtroom was unmistakable. The murder case was over, but accountability wasn't. And the verdict forced a broader conversation that extended far beyond Idaho. In the digital age, true crime is no longer confined to documentaries and court transcripts. And it lives on live streams. It trends in hashtags. It fuels algorithms. The line between analysis and accusation can blur, especially when audiences reward certainty over caution. Where does speculation end and defamation begin? Influence culture thrives on engagement. The more shocking the claim, the more views it draws. But when the subject of that claim is a real person, someone not charged, not investigated, not even remotely connected by evidence, the consequences can be profound. And the law draws boundaries. An opinion is protected. A knowingly false statement presented as fact is not. But in the rush to be first, to be viral, to be seen as insightful, those boundaries can erode. Should influencers face harsher penalties when their content causes demonstrable harm? Does holding creators legally accountable chill free speech? Or does it protect the innocent from becoming collateral damage in the age of online speculation? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, has true crime at times gone too far? The Idaho murders changed more than just one courtroom docket. Universities across the country revisited campus safety protocols. Discussions about door locks, surveillance, emergency response systems intensified. Media outlets reflected on the scale of coverage and the speed at which details, verified or not, were amplified. The public fascination never truly faded, even after the guilty plea. And even after sentencing, even after the civil verdict, the case remained a reference point in debates about crime, technology, and culture. Yet one element remains unresolved in the public record: the motive. Bryan Kohberger admitted guilt, but he did not offer a full narrative explanation in open court. The silence surrounding why the murders happened leaves space. Space that, as this case showed, can be filled by rumor. And rumor, when amplified, can carry a price. 4 lives were taken. One man will spend his life in prison, and one viral accusation cost $10 million. The Idaho murders remind us that crime doesn't end at conviction. Sometimes, the aftermath reveals just as much about society as the crime itself. This has been Crime Case Examiner. Subscribe if you believe the full story matters.